Welcome to EDUC 650's presentation on close reading. This is a strategy that will improve understanding with all learners. Today's goal is to learn more about close reading. This is something that can be used as an intervention or can be used universally with your learners to improve their literacy skills. I will provide you with a little history so we can learn more about close reading, some definitions of close reading. I will talk about the importance and impact of close reading on student learning, some techniques and ideas for implementation, and share ways that I have utilized close reading in my classroom. So a little history. In order to understand where we are today, it is important to see where we have been in the past. In the 1940s, there was something called a new criticism. The universities wanted to develop ways to teach and help their students analyze complex texts. So they came up with this idea called new criticism. And in that new criticism, they wanted their students to talk about the text and only the text, nothing but the text. Tune all of their thoughts out and just focus in on what is written in front of you. In the 1950s, the universities focused on making connections then. So this developed into making some deep personal connections to what the text was conveying, and not necessarily focusing solely on the text, but more on your experiences and your own background knowledge. So if we fast forward to now, to the 2010s, where we had this adaptation of the Common Core state standards, I had several teachers who approached me knowing that I had a reading specialist license and asked, what was this close reading idea that was reoccurring in the Common Core state standards? They were kind of like, what is this new practice? So this provided a lot of confusion with many teachers when the rough drafts of the CCSS were made public. And at that time, when I would hear the term close reading, I was thinking of the cloze procedure, CLOZE, where words were left out of a passage and the reader would fill in the blanks with the appropriate terms. However, as I thought more about that, it just didn't seem to be something that would greatly improve reading with students. It was good for using context clues, but not really something of great importance that was going to have a huge impact on students in how they read and how they understood. So after dabbling in some research and reflecting, I came to the conclusion of what we know as it today. This isn't a new idea. The idea of close reading values objective, close, analytical reading. This was an idea that had been around for a long time in education, but never really had a consistent name attached to it. I found that it was more about looking closely at certain parts of texts to come to better and a deeper understanding of the meanings behind the information. It was teaching students to read analytically and bring experiences to their reading, being able to answer some text-dependent questions. This was something that many of us already did, but we just didn't label it with a title since it was just part of what we knew was best practices. Close reading has been in the teachers' toolkits for centuries. The idea of revisiting and reading closely a piece of text and breaking it down to comprehend it better, that has always been around. It's really about teaching students to analyze text and derive meaning from those pieces that are more complex and above where they're able to read at an instructional level. So I've cited some specific standards from the Common Core that correlate to close reading. In the first standard, it says read. You see the quotes there of read closely and cite specific textual evidence, and that's part of the procedures that you follow when you are completing a close read. It also talks about analyzing how ideas develop and interact. That is your final goal. It's interpreting words and phrases and analyzing how specific word choices shape meaning. Analyzing the structure of texts. Assess how point of view shapes a text and your understanding of it. And analyze two or more texts to build knowledge. All of those standards are something that are hit and utilized when implementing a close read. So what is it? It's combining the approaches from the past and bringing them to the present. Close reading is, according to specialists, an interaction between the reader and the text. It's making careful observations about the text and interpret those observations. And it's about rereading to bring new meaning to the text. So thinking back to our Common Core standards, close reading fits with text-dependent questions, complex texts, text evidence, and increases the use of informational text reading. Even though it can be used with any text, close reading can. But when we're thinking about content reading, nonfiction is what most students would encounter in these disciplines when completing a close read. Close reading isn't typically something that is done within one sitting. Typically, it's done over the course of a few days for about 10 to 20 minutes at a time, depending on the text, purpose, and student level of understanding. Primary principles of close reading. The primary principles of close reading are figuring out what the text has to say. Don't preview the text with students. This is one of those instances where we do not want you to do a walkthrough of the text with your kids. However, I do suggest activating a small, specific amount of prior knowledge so that students can better understand the complex text they're going to be encountering. So first, you need to find short, worthy, meaningful texts that are complex. The passages you find shouldn't be more than a page long, probably more like a short article, an excerpt from a chapter of a book. And I made the mistake my first go around of trying to do some close reading by using a few pages of a chapter. And it was way too much for us to analyze in our close reads. It took way too much time and I had to scrap it and start over again. Secondly, it requires students to go back and reread parts of the text for different purposes. There are so many times that students need to go back and reread something they missed the first go around, and this principle is so true. On many of our second reads in my classroom, students find the answers to their questions that they had in the first read. And then they mention how could they have missed that? Because many times on our first read, we're not really paying attention to the words and making meaning out of it. Many times readers are focused on just getting through it. But if we really want them to understand, they have to reread and revisit that information again. Thirdly, close reading focuses on text-dependent questions that require students to dig deeper into the text. Text-dependent questions are the ones where students have to be able to cite a part of the text or story that proves their answer is true. It makes students practice annotation, reading with a pencil. And when students are annotating and reading with a pencil, they are showing metacognition. Metacognition is what some students are missing. Having to annotate that text forces them to show their thinking as they read and makes them aware of the meaning being made as they're going through that text. During close reading, the reader is focused on author's meaning, craft, and technique. So besides just comprehension, during a close read, you can look at the literary elements of a text, which can be your focus of your close read. Close reading is social. In the real world, book clubs aren't the only places where discussion of something that has been read happens. Think about in different careers where employees need to discuss something with one another so they understand what needs to be done. Discussion is paramount after individual reflection and throughout any kind of close reading. And close reading is something that can be used in all content areas and at all grades. It isn't just something for ELA class, for your English Language Arts class, your reading class, your writing class. It's beneficial for all content areas and any grade. In the high school, it's going to be more complex, obviously. But in art, you can use it with a painting. In music, you can use it with the notes. In math, it can be used with word problems, looking at charts and graphs. So there are lots of different applications for close reading. So close reading is not something that is a daily occurrence. It's something that should be strategically be placed to help students understand a topic better or lead them into independence. It is not an instructional approach for all texts. It doesn't work for everything. Your choices of text need to be specific. You need to have a specific purpose in mind when you're using this text for close reading. It is not exclusive for ELA. It's great to use with complex materials in any content area. It is not an intervention. However, I have found it to be great in helping struggling readers dig deeper to find meaning and to have that metacognition. Close reading is not using a worksheet or an assigned reading, and it's not a new practice. Close reading is complex and varied. It should be used with material that is above the student's reading level, and not the same type of material should be used each time. You should be able to use different kinds of materials so that they are exposed to different structures and different formats of texts. Close reading is like a vitamin-packed lesson. So much learning can happen in close reads. There are so many different aspects of breaking the text apart. So you do need to be strategic, as I've said, and purposeful with what you want your students to get out and be able to do with whatever material you're putting in front of them for a close read. It's closely aligned with learning objectives for a course or unit, and so it's great for teaching specific skills within units and lessons, especially when you're focusing and honing in on certain reading skills or instructional strategies. It is up to the teacher to plan and design it, so you have that flexibility of doing what you want with that piece of text and helping your students to get information and get meaning out of the text that you're using. And it is a desired outcome for the real world. I think about how I often have to go back and reread to understand something about my vehicle or medical symptoms. And just recently we adopted a couple of cats and my allergies started to flare up a little bit. So I wanted to do some research to find out what I can do, how I can maybe alleviate these allergies without having to take too much medicine. And so I was doing some research and found myself having to reread so that I could come to a deeper understanding of how allergies work and the best remedies for the type of allergies that I have in relation to my little kitty cats. There is a lot of great scaffolding that can go on within close reads. So when thinking about implementing this with students, we need to apply the gradual release of responsibility model. We need to show our students how we think about a piece of text, not telling them what to think. We're showing them how the thinking is going on in our heads so that they can apply that to their reading and have the same kind of thinking going on in their heads. Doing that is very powerful. So you always need to model with any first encounters with anything, but especially with close reading. And as you model, you need to break it down into the steps that you're taking in order to figure out that challenging information that you're coming across. That modeling with our first encounters of teaching students to close read is important. Then close reading can become independent as we continue throughout the year. So when first introducing and completing a close read, you should read the text out loud to your students. Show them how you approach those unknown terms or phrases. Are you using your context clues? Are you bringing in your background knowledge? Do you have to get out a dictionary or pull out your device and look it up? Show them how you're thinking and the kinds of questions that you're asking yourself about the text as you are going through it. Teach them how to annotate the text and read with their pencil. What kinds of things do I want to mark up? Whenever I'm thinking about something and something that's important, and I'm staying focused on the text, that's when I'm going to annotate it and read with my pencil. And teach them how you're going to attack those text-dependent questions. Are you using the question-answer relationship? Are you identifying things that are going to be right there, things that are going to be think and search, things that are going to be author and you, things that are going to be on your own? You need to do a lot of modeling when you're first starting close reads because they are something that can easily be implemented throughout the whole school year. But once that first encounter is down, students will need little modeling afterwards. Impact on student learning. The benefits of revisiting and rereading text to fully understand is going to be huge. As adults, we do this so often. I find myself turning back to previous pages and rereading sections so that I can better understand a part that I'm on, whether it's fiction or a nonfiction book. It also helps students to persevere in their reading and understanding that they're going to come across challenging texts and not just to give up. Through close reading, students learn not to just give up so easily. They learn that you need to revisit spots to gain insight. You need to go back and you need to use different strategies in order to figure out things that didn't make sense the first time around. Teaches students to analyze a text for purpose and levels of meaning. Setting a purpose for students assists in helping them making meaning. It helps students to cite evidence from the text so they can support their ideas. They're able to justify their answers with evidence from the text, which makes their ideas more powerful and accurate. Students are monitoring their comprehension while they're reading when they're using close reading. By annotating the text, it forces students to show their thinking as they read, which is what some struggling readers need. Our struggling readers are really good at word reading, but they aren't always making meaning. They don't have that metacognition, and having to annotate the text forces them to monitor their comprehension. And it also makes students participate in rich and rigorous discussions about common texts with their peers. Discussion is so much of what makes progress happen and ideas come to fruition. And that discussion where you're bouncing ideas off of each other is so important when coming to conclusions about the text or anything in general. So how do you plan for your close read? Well, you're going to need a few days for more complex texts because there will be several rereadings of the text for different purposes each day. And I'm going to tell you that the first day will be the longest. And keep in mind that students will be the most independent that first day as they encounter the text for the first time. Please make sure that you're using short, high-quality text for use over several days. You don't want the text to be too complex, so don't bring in something that someone who's going to get their PhD, don't bring that into your science classroom. But a grade or so above where your students are at would probably be appropriate. There should be minimal front-loading of the topic and minimal front-loading of any vocabulary that they're going to find within the text. And by minimal, I mean just some short brainstorming of basic ideas for your front-loading and accessing that background knowledge. With vocabulary, any real challenging vocabulary or content-specific vocabulary should be front-loaded if the students wouldn't be able to figure it out with the context clues that are within the text already. Should create some text-dependent questions that require students to find evidence from the text to support their answers and ideas. Think about what is it that you want your students to be able to know and do. The three main areas of our text-dependent questions are questions about key ideas and details, questions about the author's craft and structure, and lastly, the integration of knowledge and ideas. Those are three main areas of text-dependent questions. How are you going to have your students annotate the text? Are they going to be able to write in the margin? Do they have their own copy? Are they going to be using Post-it notes? Are you going to ask them to underline and circle? So how are they going to show that metacognition that's happening in their head? How are they going to read with their pencil? And lastly, the culminating task. What is the new or final understanding of the text, the key ideas, the theme that you want students walking away from this close reading really understanding? Ultimately, what do you want them to learn from this close read? Is it the information within it? Is it citing evidence? Is it looking at word choice? Is it using context clues? What is your main focus? Whatever you're going to be doing for your close read, you will need to go through it yourself and decide where and what you want to focus on. How do you want students to annotate? Where are the students going to struggle? Where do you think they're going to have misconceptions? Those ideas that you're going to need to clear up so that they can truly understand what the close read is all about. But you do need to plan ahead. I find that sometimes I have a great plan ahead, and after listening to my students, I end up flipping the script a little bit and changing things around. But having some focus from the beginning is going to help you to be more successful with any close read and anything really that you do in your teaching life. So we know students thrive on routine and structure. Following these three simple rituals when approaching your close read when approaching your close reads will help your students to gain independence faster. I will go into more detail with each over the next few slides. But basically, you're working from your basic kind of thinking to more higher level thinking. You're starting with that recall and comprehension in that read number 1, where they're reading through lenses and trying to figure out what the text says. They're looking for just basic information in the text. Through your second reading, you're using lenses to find patterns. How does the text say it? So they're looking there at more text structure and format. Is the information in time order? Is it a problem with the solution? Is it a description, comparing, contrasting, etc., etc.? And then lastly, they're going to use the patterns of the text to develop a new understanding, what it really means. What's that deeper understanding? Where they're analyzing and evaluating the information and thinking about what it really means to our lives, the big picture, and coming to some final conclusions. So the first part of our ritual is reading through lenses, thinking about what the text says, where you're looking for key ideas and details, deciding what you want to focus on with your close read, and collecting those details. These are basic reading comprehension, recall, getting the gist type of ideas, that lower level of Bloom's taxonomy. You want to think about what the text says, and this focuses on the most important elements of the text. Here's where you're going to set your purpose for reading. Students are going to need to start marking up the text. And many times I choose to have them using codes to show their thinking, and I have shared those codes with you on my anchor chart here. And then I also ask them to note vocabulary and language that is confusing and unknown and important. So we're just kind of going through getting the gist. It's about creating those initial thoughts about what the text means. And then the students are reading it independently. There's not a lot of support from you this first time around. They're reading through it themselves, looking at what they can understand and what are their struggles. So after this first read, students should discuss and share what they've gleaned from the text. And sometimes I do this in a summary statement about the text where they sum it up in one sentence. Sometimes I have them just jot down 3 important ideas. Lots of different ways that you can have them do that. I always have them doing some kind of talking with a partner or a small group or the whole class. And then I ask for them to share out ideas. As they share out ideas, this is where you can kind of fine-tune the rest of your close read by seeing what students need. What is it that they're not getting during that first read through? And sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes they get way more than you thought they would, and others, they didn't hardly get anything that you wanted them to get. So that's what I mean about making sure that you're flexible with what you're asking them to do and how you're going to run that. So the second part of the ritual is to use lenses to find patterns. What are the patterns of the details found? Here we're looking at the craft and structure of the text. How does the text say it? Focus on how the text works. So after this reread, your focus is more on the vocabulary in the text, the structure of the text features, using text-dependent questions to help them focus on digging and discussing deeper. This is also a time to look at the author's craft, the author's language, the mood and tone within the text, and the word choice. Make sure that you're having students discussing with partner or small groups their findings this time around. And sometimes I ask students to pick out terms that are important to understanding the information, or to look at the connotation or denotation of the words for use with context clues. We may also look at how the reading is organized and the best way to navigate or approach the text. And we always end our second read talking about questions that are remaining that weren't clarified by the first reading. So what were things that they were still wondering about that they weren't able to find an answer to? The third ritual is to use patterns to develop a new understanding of text. Using those new patterns found with details, you need students to come to a deeper evidence-based understanding. And this is the integration of knowledge and ideas. Thinking about what the text means and how it connects to information they know by analyzing and synthesizing the information with more text-dependent questions and or applying it with new information. And at the end of reading, I may have students create a paragraph summary I may ask them specific questions about whatever focus may be, like do the visuals enhance the information for them? What is their new understanding of the information? But this is the higher level. What is their synthesis of this information? What is the big picture now? So here are some different ideas for implementing close reads. You can use written text such as articles, poems, excerpts, short passages, everyday text like a bus schedule that I have pictured here, or a menu, or something else they might encounter every day in their lives. You can also use, besides written texts, visual and audible texts, things like cartoons and comics. You could listen to songs, look at different pictures and sculptures, charts and graphs, paintings. I oftentimes like to use cartoons in my class and comics in my class. Calvin and Hobbes is always a favorite of many of my sixth graders because not only are they funny, but there's some sarcasm in there, but there's also some high level thinking going on with Calvin in some of those comics. I also like to use The Far Side, and I'll be using that as an example in the next slide and how I walk through that. I also like to use infographics for teaching about text features and using those text features so that you're digging into those and not just the body paragraphs of a piece of text. I also have an example of that. And then other resources that I have tapped into are articles from Newsela, which is awesome because you can adjust the Lexile. They do come with some text-dependent questions, although I have mixed feelings about some of the questions sometimes. Think Circa, it's Think and then CIRCA, that also has a plethora of different articles to use if you're at the high school level. Kelly Gallagher usually has an article of the week that he pulls out and he has students do close reading with. I also have used close reading to do some fluency work where students are doing certain readings of the text and they're timing each other and they're working together to see how after 4 different reads, if they've met their goal, if they've increased their fluency, which they should have after 4 different repeats of the same information. So here's an example of what I do for a close reading of cartoons. Like I mentioned, the Far Side cartoons often expect the reader to do a lot of inferring and applying of their background knowledge. This is a type of close read that happens all within one day for about 10 to 20 minutes. This is not something that I would do over a multitude of different days. It would just be a sit down, let's kind of do something fun. And my students really enjoy these. I usually have Far Side cartoons up around my classroom, which gave me the idea of using it as a close read, since many times they'd come up to me and tell me that they didn't understand what one of the cartoons was about. So that's where I got the idea of utilizing it in this fashion. So before even, I give them a half sheet of paper that you can see there with the Far Side close reading, just so that they can work through their thinking. Before even showing them the cartoon, I ask for a little bit of background knowledge. So in this case, I usually would ask, what do you know about parrots? And you get a lot of things. They're birds, their bones are hollow. And what I really want them to get is that they mimic people. They will repeat what you say. Then I show the image, I show the little cartoon for a very short glance, not maybe 10 seconds, I don't even know. Sometimes not even that long. Not really giving them enough time to really read it, because you can see here there's a caption at the bottom. Sometimes I use cartoons without captions and without words, but just a short glance. Then they describe what they think is happening in the cartoon from the first glance, their initial thoughts from that little look. Then I show the image again and let them examine the cartoon and have them analyze it, explaining what the true meaning is and identify what from the image helped them come to that conclusion. And let me back up a little bit. When they're talking about parrots, I have them share with a partner, turn and talk, and then we share out in a large group. And so I hope that someone along the way somewhere is going to say that parrots will mimic, they will repeat what you say, because then that does add to the understanding of the close read. Then I ask, why would this be considered funny? And later on in the year, I would use words like irony, oxymoron, and other different types of figurative language that students could identify in these types of cartoons. I like using this because it is short and sweet, but also when I have topics in class that have been pretty heavy, or I really have a focus on a mini lesson that it works well for, I like to use the cartoons. Plus, the kids, it's fun for them. They don't really think that they're learning. But it also shows students that reading is more than just letters and words, that it is really about your thinking that happens, not just the reading, it's more thinking. Here's an example of a close read from National Geographic. So this is an infographic about the universe. This needed some higher level thinking, but I was looking for a way to integrate some infographics and science material. Sixth grade science doesn't quite cover the topic of space, but our science teacher said that she's noticed an interest with this year's group, so it worked out perfectly. Students received a grayscale replica, but I shared this original so they could see the pretty colors. And the procedure for this close read went as follows and lasted over the course of several days. So with the first read, we started by brainstorming a few things on their own, and then they shared it out. Things about universe theories of how the universe was created and about Einstein, because the article does talk about Einstein. They started by sharing with a partner in table group, and then we shared it out. Then I gave them time to read the information on their own. And as the students read, they were tasked to find at least 2 important words from the infographic and 2 words, those that they would have to look up that were unfamiliar to them, 2 questions about the read, and a summary statement. In the second read, I have students reread the information with a partner. So that first read was all on their own. Second read is with a partner. After they share their important words and why they felt that those words were important, they place the words on Post-its with their reasoning of why they chose them and discuss the different visuals and text features and other important things they found within the text. During the third read, the students have a new partner. They reread the article a third time. They share any of those confusing, unfamiliar words if they haven't been able to figure them out. If they can't put their heads together and figure out the meanings of those confusing words and their context clues don't work, I have them check with the dictionary. They all have their own iPads, so they quickly look them up and then write that information down on a Post-its. They then, once they're done reading the article and they go over their words, they're going to share any questions and come to some conclusions about those questions. If they can't figure out the answers to their questions, they might go ahead and search on the internet and see what they can find. If the information that they find on the internet is valid and relevant, they write that on a Post-it note and attach it to the infographic as well. And then finally, as that final pair, they're going to create a summary of the new information. And this is more detailed than the initial summary statement that was done independently. The summary has to follow the same summary format that all 6th graders have, which is at least 5 sentences with details and evidence within the summary. These are written with the partner and on lined paper, and they turn that in. So I don't have an example of the turned in summaries, but here's a student example from the infographic. This is an above average student. So you can kind of see his thinking about Einstein and the universe, some of the words that he came across, some of the questions. Then he has a summary statement along the bottom, and then he has his couple Post-its. And this student was not really that into science, but he was pretty bright and could figure things out pretty quickly on his own. So I'll just give you a few moments to kind of glance at those and look at what he had written down. I'm sorry that it's kind of hard to read. This next infographic is an example from a struggling student. And as you can see, her background knowledge, she has less background knowledge than the above average student, and she put her words on those green Post-its up there, and she has a lot more words chosen than the other student. You can kind of see some of her thinking. Her questions are kind of hard to read there, and her summary statement gets cut off at the bottom. But both of these students may have had different beginnings, with just that first read under their belt, but after following the close read procedure, digging deeper, and discussing the information with their peers, both students' endings are pretty much the same. Their final conclusions are somewhat similar. So it helps both students to really dig deeper and find more meaning within what it is that they're reading. But there's some heavy thinking going on throughout the whole process. Ugh. My students hate it when I ask them to reread. I was like, oh, reread? What do I have to reread? But rereading is what good readers do. We need to teach students to get past that. Good readers use these skills instinctively without really even knowing it. Rereading, like I said, is what good readers do. When we're rereading, or when you're talking to students about rereading, you need to share personal experiences with them about how we continually need to go back and reread parts of the text to make sense. Take them through that process. That modeling and the gradual release of responsibility is so important, and demonstrate how powerful going back and analyzing things can be. I oftentimes remember when we read this article, and when you read through it the second and third time, you totally answered those questions that you didn't get that first time around. So sometimes we do have to go back and reread. It is powerful, and we need to show students that it's not extra work. It's something that is powerful for them and can help them be intelligent creatures and readers that they should strive to be. So final thoughts. With close reads, make sure you have short, complex passages. Make sure that your students are doing some kind of annotating to show their metacognition, whether it's circling, underlining, highlighting, coding, writing in the margins, putting their ideas down on Post-it notes. Student discussion is paramount. They need to talk about their findings. They need to talk about their struggles. They need to talk about what it is they're encountering within that text. Provide them with some text-dependent questions with focus. So they know that they're not just reading this just to read it. They're not going through the motions. There is an end. There is a purpose for it. And lastly, help students to come to a final understanding that holds deeper meaning than what their initial thoughts are. Show them that from read number 1 to read number 3 or read number 4, how much better they know that information. And lastly, do great things.